When the Galactic Consortium's most feared enforcement squad encounters what they believe is just another primitive human female on a backwater space station, they make the fatal mistake of underestimating humanity's most dangerous trait, the ability to turn absolutely feral when pushed too far. What starts as routine intimidation quickly becomes a masterclass in why humans are the galaxy's most terrifying species, especially when they're having a really bad day. Nexus Station 7 had seen better days, better decades, and honestly, better centuries. The aging commercial hub floated in the backwater regions of Sector 15, where legitimate business went to die, and questionable enterprises thrived like fungus in a moisture recycler. The station's corridors reeked of recycled air, desperation, and whatever that green substance was that leaked from the Zelkarian food vendors. But for Zektar and his elite Vorthak enforcement team, it was paradise. "Another beautiful day in paradise, boys," Zektar rumbled, his voice carrying the kind of gravelly menace that made lesser species evacuate their bowels involuntarily. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with chitinous armor plating that nature had thoughtfully provided, he was evolution's answer to the question, what if a scorpion and a really angry bodybuilder had a baby? His team of 4 equally charming Vorthaks flanked him as they strutted down Corridor 7 Alpha, their clawed feet clicking against the deck plating in a rhythm that screamed protection racket. Grix, the demolitions expert, was busy picking something unidentifiable from his mandibles. Thalo, their tech specialist, was running probability calculations on his wrist display, calculating, no doubt, how much they could squeeze from today's victims. Krex and Venth, the muscle of the operation, which was saying something considering they were all muscle, scanned the crowd for targets. "Status report, Thalo," Zektar commanded, his compound eyes gleaming with the kind of predatory satisfaction that made small creatures burrow deeper into whatever they called home. 17 successful collections this rotation, Commander," Thalo chittered, his translator rendering his native clicks into standard Galactic. The Phyroxian gem traders paid triple after Krex demonstrated his persuasive capabilities on their security door. "Excellent. And the humans?" "Oh, the humans." Thalo's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among their species. "Still the most profitable demographic. Soft, weak, completely non-threatening. They practically throw credits at us the moment we show up." This assessment wasn't entirely unfair. From a Vorthak perspective, humans had joined the galactic community only 50 standard years ago, and their reputation preceded them like a bad smell. They were squishy, had laughably fragile bones, possessed no natural armor, claws, or even decent fangs. Most species looked at humans the way Zektar looked at those tiny squeaking creatures that inhabited ventilation shafts, not exactly threatening. The fact that human females were typically smaller than their males only reinforced the Vorthak worldview. In their culture, females were the warriors, the hunters, the ones who ate their mates after reproduction, if said mates didn't prove sufficiently useful afterward. Human gender dynamics seemed backward, primitive, almost quaint. There, Krex's bass rumble interrupted Zektar's philosophical musings. Human female, alone, perfect target. Zektar followed Krex's pointing claw to a figure hunched over a datapad at one of the trading post's information terminals. She was indeed human, indeed female, and indeed looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail that suggested she'd been living on ship's rations and recycled air for too long. Her jumpsuit bore the faded logo of Chen Freight Solutions, and she was currently engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with the terminal's interface. "Perfect," Zektar purred, the sound resembling a garbage disposal with anger management issues. "She looks tired, frustrated, and completely alone. Textbook easy mark." Sarah Chen was, indeed, tired. She was tired of bureaucratic nonsense, tired of shipping delays, tired of her coffee maker producing something that resembled motor oil more than actual coffee, and especially tired of galactic trade regulations that seemed designed by committee, a committee of sadistic hyper-intelligent slugs with nothing better to do than make honest freight haulers fill out forms in triplicate. "Come on, you piece of obsolete tech," she muttered at the terminal, jabbing the interface with increasing frustration. "Manifest approval. It's not quantum physics. It's literally just cargo goes from point A to point B. Humans transport cargo. Approve the flaming manifest." The terminal, in a display of artificial intelligence that bordered on malicious compliance, cheerfully informed her that she needed additional documentation from the Health and Safety Bureau, located on sub-level 12, which was currently closed for lunch. For the next 4 hours, Sarah stared at the screen, her jaw tightening in a way that, had any human military veterans been present, would have triggered immediate evacuation protocols. But there were no human veterans nearby. Just 4 very large, very confident Vorthaks, who had just decided she looked like an easy way to make their quota for the day. "This," Sarah said to the universe in general, "is exactly why I should have stayed in the core." Sarah was deep into her 3rd attempt at convincing the terminal that yes, her cargo of agricultural supplements really was just agricultural supplements and not some elaborate smuggling operation, when 4 very large shadows fell across her workspace. The kind of shadows that suggested either someone had parked a small spacecraft behind her, or the local muscle had decided to pay her a visit. She didn't need to turn around to know which option it was. The clicking of chitinous feet against deck plating, the low rumbling that passed for Vorthak conversation, and the sudden way every other being in the trading post had found urgent business elsewhere. These were all clear indicators that her day was about to get significantly worse. "Excuse me, little human," came a voice that sounded like gravel being processed through a cement mixer. "We need to have a conversation." Sarah's fingers paused over the data pad. She could see the reflection of 4 towering figures in the terminal screen, their compound eyes glittering with the kind of predatory satisfaction that she'd seen before, on battlefields, right before things got messy. "I'm busy," she said without turning around, her voice carrying the particular brand of exhaustion that comes from dealing with bureaucracy for 6 straight hours. "If you're looking for directions to the nearest intimidation seminar, I'm pretty sure it's down the hall, past the How to Overcompensate for Your Personality Defects workshop." The lead Vorthak, and Sarah was already mentally cataloguing him as Big Ugly Number 1, chittered something that his translator rendered as laughter. "Oh, how amusing. The soft little human thinks she has teeth." Sarah finally turned around and immediately wished she hadn't, not because the 4 Vorthaks were particularly terrifying. She'd seen worse over morning coffee in the Colonial Marines, but because she recognized the look in their compound eyes. It was the same look predators got when they thought they'd cornered something small and helpless. They'd arranged themselves in a classic intimidation formation, leader front and center, 2 flankers blocking her escape routes, and 1 bringing up the rear in case she tried to bolt. Textbook stuff, really. The kind of thing they probably taught in Bullying 101 at whatever passed for their academy. "Look, gentlemen," Sarah said, and the way she pronounced gentleman suggested she was using the term in its loosest possible definition. "I'm having what could generously be described as a really, really bad week. My coffee maker's broken, my cargo hold smells like something died in it, and I've been trying to get this manifest approved since before your species learned to walk upright. So maybe we could skip the whole menacing intimidation routine and get to whatever it is you actually want." Big Ugly Number 1, Zektar, according to the name patch on his tactical vest, spread his arms wide in a gesture that probably looked threatening to species that hadn't spent years dealing with actual threats. "What we want is simple. Little female. A small fee. Call it insurance. Against accidents." "Accidents," Sarah repeated, her tone flatter than a deflated atmosphere dome. "Right. The kind of accidents that involve my kneecaps making intimate contact with your friend's fists, I'm guessing?" Grix, the one Sarah had mentally designated as Ugly Number 2, clicked his mandibles in what passed for Vorthak amusement. "She's quick, this one. Yes, little human. Those kinds of accidents." The trading post had gone suspiciously quiet. Other beings, Cathari merchants, Zelkarian traders, even a couple of Feroxians, had found sudden interest in their data pads, their inventory, anything that didn't involve watching what was clearly about to be another routine shakedown of a human. This was standard procedure in the outer stations. Humans paid up, everyone moved on with their lives, no one got hurt. Sarah looked around at the carefully averted eyes, the sudden fascination with floor patterns, the way conversations had died mid-sentence. She'd seen this before too. The moment when bystanders decided that whatever was about to happen was somebody else's problem. "You know what?" Sarah said, conversationally, her voice taking on the kind of calm that experienced soldiers recognized as a warning sign. "I've had enough of this station, enough of these forms, and definitely enough of oversized crustaceans thinking they can push people around just because they're having a bad molt or whatever it is you do." She took a step back, putting her hands up in what looked like a gesture of surrender. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to back off, find someone else to bother, and let me get back to my paperwork, Because I am not in the mood for this today. Thalo, who had been running calculations on his wrist display, looked up with the kind of expression that suggested he'd just solved a particularly easy math problem. Or what, soft little human? You'll file a complaint with station security. Or, Sarah said, her voice dropping to the kind of quiet that made smart people pay attention, I'm going to ask you very nicely one time to leave me alone. And when you don't listen, because let's be honest, you're not going to listen, I'm going to demonstrate why picking on random humans is a really, really bad idea. Krex and Venth exchanged what passed for glances among their species. This human was displaying unusual behavior patterns. Most humans, when confronted with Vorthak intimidation, either ran or immediately began negotiations regarding payment schedules. This one seemed to be doing neither. Don't grab me, Sarah added, almost as an afterthought, her eyes scanning the four aliens with the kind of professional assessment that had absolutely nothing to do with fear and everything to do with tactical evaluation. That's important. Whatever else happens here, do not put your claws on me. Grix's mandibles clicked in what could only be described as contemptuous amusement. 8 feet of chitinous armor and natural weaponry, being worn by something that probably weighed less than his left arm. The absurdity was too much. He reached out with one clawed appendage and grabbed Sarah's shoulder, his grip firm enough to leave marks on human skin. The trading post held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable surrender, the pleading, the quick negotiation that would end with another human learning their place in the galactic hierarchy. What they got instead was something entirely different. Something that would make them reconsider everything they thought they knew about the small, soft species from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Sarah looked down at the claw on her shoulder. She looked back up at Grix. Her expression was the kind of calm that preceded natural disasters. You know, she said conversationally, I really tried to warn you. What happened next took exactly 1.7 seconds, according to the station's security recordings that would later be analyzed by 17 different species military intelligence services. But from Grix's perspective, the perspective of a being who suddenly found himself experiencing a level of pain he hadn't thought physically possible, it felt like an eternity compressed into a heartbeat. Sarah's hand moved with the kind of casual efficiency that spoke of muscle memory drilled in under live fire conditions. She grabbed Grix's wrist, stepped into his space with a movement that looked almost like a dance step, and applied precisely the right amount of leverage in exactly the wrong direction. The snap of chitinous bone breaking echoed through the trading post like a gunshot. Grix's scream, a sound that registered on frequencies that made nearby electronics glitch, was cut short as Sarah followed through with an elbow strike that introduced his mandibles to the trading post's floor with considerable force. All 8 feet of armored predator crumpled like a badly designed atmospheric tent. The transformation was instantaneous and absolutely terrifying. The tired, frustrated freight pilot was gone, replaced by something that moved like liquid death and evaluated threats the way accountants evaluated tax deductions, methodically, thoroughly, and with professional interest. Sarah's eyes swept the trading post in a tactical assessment that took less time than most beings needed to blink. 4 exits. Main corridor north, maintenance access south, emergency airlock west, service tunnel east, 12 witnesses, all suddenly finding their data pads fascinating. Nearest security checkpoint, 200 meters down corridor 7 Alpha. Response time, assuming they weren't playing cards again, approximately 4 minutes. Plenty of time. Well, Sarah said, stepping over Grix's twitching form with the kind of casual indifference usually reserved for navigating around minor obstacles. That's one. You know what? My cargo hold is already a mess. My coffee maker's broken. I haven't had a decent meal in 3 days, and now this. She gestured vaguely at the 3 remaining Vorthaks, who were staring at their downed teammate with expressions that suggested their worldview was currently undergoing rapid and unwelcome revision. Thalo was the first to recover, his compound eyes refocusing on this human female who had just casually dismantled the most dangerous member of their squad. His tactical computer was running probability calculations so fast that smoke was literally rising from his wrist display. Impossible, he chittered, his translator struggling with the rapid-fire clicks. Humans don't, they can't. The strength differential alone. Oh, honey, Sarah said, her voice carrying the kind of patronizing sweetness that made veteran sergeants weep with nostalgia. You really need to update your intelligence files. Did you honestly think we joined the galactic community by asking nicely? Krex, displaying the kind of tactical awareness that had kept him alive through 17 enforcement actions, started backing toward the main corridor. We should call for backup. This human is clearly malfunctioning. Malfunctioning? Sarah's laugh could have stripped paint. Sweethearts, this is me functioning exactly as designed. Colonial Marines don't retire, we just change our job descriptions. The words Colonial Marines hit the three remaining Vorthaks like a cargo container dropped from orbital height. Every species in the galaxy had heard stories about human military forces, but those were just stories, surely. Tales told to frighten younglings about the soft pink creatures who somehow managed to win a three-front war against species with natural armor and weaponry. Venth, who prided himself on being the smart one of the group, was rapidly recalculating their tactical position. We can still take her. 3 against 1. Close quarters. No weapon. Sarah glanced around the trading post and selected a cargo manifest scanner from the nearest counter. The device was roughly the size and weight of a small club, with several sharp edges where the casing had been damaged by previous encounters with frustrated shipping clerks. No weapons, she said, testing the scanner's weight with a few casual swings that made the air whistle. Clearly you've never seen a human with office supplies. Zektar, who had built his reputation on being the smartest predator in any given room, was beginning to suspect that today he wasn't even close. The human stance, the way she moved, the casual competence with which she'd dismantled Grix. This wasn't some soft civilian. This was a weapon that happened to be wearing a freight pilot's jumpsuit. Perhaps, he said carefully, his voice losing its earlier menace and gaining a note of professional respect. We could discuss this like civilized beings. Surely there's no need for further. Sarah tilted her head, considering this. You know, that's actually a reasonable suggestion. If you'd made it about 30 seconds ago, before your friend here decided to grab me despite my very clear instructions, we might have worked something out. She hefted the scanner, getting a feel for its balance. But see, now I'm committed. I told you not to touch me. I warned you that I was having a bad week. I gave you every opportunity to walk away. And what did you do? You laughed. The three Vorthaks exchanged glances that communicated volumes about their rapidly deteriorating tactical situation. Around the trading post, other beings were edging toward exits with the kind of careful movements that suggested they'd suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. The thing is, Sarah continued, advancing on them with the measured pace of someone who had all the time in the universe and intended to use it efficiently, I've been dealing with bureaucratic nonsense for 6 hours. My last 3 shipments were delayed because of some ridiculous quarantine regulations, and I just spent my last credits on what the food vendor assured me was coffee, but which I'm pretty sure was actually recycled coolant fluid. Thalo's wrist computer finally gave up trying to calculate odds and simply displayed an error message in 17 languages. So when 4 oversized arthropods decide that I look like an easy target for their little protection racket, Sarah said, her voice taking on the kind of cheerful enthusiasm that made experienced combatants run for cover, well, that just puts the perfect cap on a perfect day, doesn't it? She swung the scanner in a practice arc, and the 3 Vorthaks finally understood why humans had managed to survive in a galaxy full of bigger, stronger, better-armed species. It wasn't because they were the toughest or the smartest or the most technologically advanced. It was because when you backed a human into a corner, when you pushed them past their limit, when you made the mistake of thinking they were helpless, they stopped pretending to be civilized. What followed was less a fight and more a masterclass in applied violence, taught by someone who had clearly earned advanced degrees in the subject. Sarah moved through the trading post like she owned it, turning every piece of ordinary equipment into an instrument of educational brutality. Thalo made the first mistake of trying to rush her, all 8 feet of chitinous armor and predatory confidence. Sarah sidestepped with the kind of casual grace that made it look like she'd simply decided to examine something interesting on the floor, then brought the cargo scanner down on his left knee joint with surgical precision. The sound was like a tree branch snapping in a storm, followed immediately by Thalo's shriek of agony as he discovered that Vorthak armor plating, while impressive against energy weapons, provided surprisingly little protection against good old-fashioned kinetic force applied at exactly the right angle. You know, Sarah said conversationally, stepping over Thalo's writhing form, I really should thank you guys. It's been months since I had a proper workout. A Cathari merchant near the exit was frantically recording everything on his personal communicator, his 4 eyes wide with the kind of shock usually reserved for witnessing natural disasters. His translator was working overtime to process the rapid-fire commentary he was providing for what would later become the most watched combat footage in galactic history. "The human female has engaged multiple Vorthak enforcers," he whispered into his device, his voice shaking. "She appears to be winning. No, not winning. Dominating. With office equipment." Krex, showing the kind of tactical intelligence that had kept him alive through numerous enforcement actions, grabbed a cargo hook from the nearest loading station, a meter-long piece of hardened alloy designed for moving freight containers. In his massive claws, it looked like a proper weapon. Sarah glanced at the improvised weapon and nodded approvingly. "Now that's more like it. Finally, someone who understands the situation." Krex swung the cargo hook in a wide arc that would have taken most beings' head clean off. Sarah ducked under it, rolled behind him, and somehow managed to grab one of the gravity lift controls that regulated the loading equipment. The sudden shift in local gravity sent Krex stumbling forward just as Sarah repositioned herself behind a cargo container. She waited until he was perfectly positioned, then hit the emergency reverse on the gravity lift. Krex found himself accelerated upward at roughly 3 times normal gravity, directly into the trading post's overhead crane system. The collision between 8 feet of armored Vorthak and several tons of cargo-moving equipment created a sound that would haunt the nightmares of every witness for years to come. "Physics," Sarah said cheerfully, watching Krex's unconscious form dangle from the crane like a very large, very ugly wind chime. "It's not just a good idea, it's the law." A group of Zelkarian traders had pressed themselves against the far wall, their tentacles quivering with terror as they watched this small human female systematically dismantle what they had believed to be the most dangerous beings on the station. One of them was gibbering prayers in 17 different languages simultaneously. Zektar, the last one standing, was rapidly recalculating everything he thought he knew about humans, about their capabilities, and about his own life expectancy. His compound eyes tracked Sarah's movement as she casually selected what appeared to be a maintenance tool from a nearby service panel. "You're not just a freight pilot," he said, and it wasn't a question. Sarah looked up from examining the plasma welding torch she'd just acquired, her expression suggesting she was considering various creative applications for the tool. "Oh, I am absolutely a freight pilot. Chen Freight Solutions, fully licensed and bonded. It's just that freight piloting wasn't my first career choice." She activated the plasma torch, and the blue-white flame cast dancing shadows across her face. "I used to be in the business of introducing hostile alien species to the concept of human military doctrine. Retirement is supposed to be quieter, but apparently the universe has other plans." Zektar looked around the trading post at Grix, still unconscious on the floor, at Thalo clutching his shattered knee, at Krex dangling from the overhead equipment like a broken toy. He looked at the other species pressed against the walls, recording everything, their expressions ranging from terror to morbid fascination. "What do you want?" he asked, and there was no menace left in his voice, just the weary resignation of someone who had finally grasped the full scope of his tactical error. Sarah considered this, tapping the plasma torch against her chin, in a gesture that sent waves of panic through every Vorthak nervous system in the vicinity. "You know what? I want my manifest approved. I want my coffee maker to work properly. I want whoever designed the Galactic trade regulation system to experience a sudden and enlightening encounter with their own bureaucracy." She gestured around the trading post with the plasma torch, leaving little trails of light in the air. "I want 5 minutes of peace and quiet without some oversized arthropod thinking I look like easy prey. But most of all, I want to finish my paperwork and get back to my ship before the recycled air in here gives me a headache." The sound of security boots thundering down the corridor finally reached the trading post, about 4 minutes too late to do anything except witness the aftermath. Commander Velash of Station Security burst through the main entrance with a full tactical team, energy weapons at the ready, expecting to find the usual scene: human victim, Vorthak intimidators, probably some minor property damage. What he found instead was carnage that looked like it had been orchestrated by someone with both intimate knowledge of Vorthak anatomy and access to a well-stocked hardware store. "By the 7 moons," Velash breathed, his Cathari vocal cords struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. His security team fanned out behind him, weapons raised but clearly uncertain about what exactly they were supposed to be targeting. Sarah looked up from where she was using the plasma torch to cut Krex down from the crane, apparently having decided that leaving him hanging there constituted littering. "Oh, hello, officer," Don't mind me just cleaning up a bit." She gestured casually at the 3 groaning Vorthaks. "These gentlemen seemed to think I needed to pay them some kind of protection fee." I explained that I wasn't interested. There was a minor disagreement about the specifics. Velash stared at her, then at the devastation, then back at her. "You did this, all of this, by yourself?" Sarah powered down the plasma torch and set it carefully back in its maintenance bracket, because proper equipment storage was important even in the middle of what some people might generously call a combat zone. She brushed off her jumpsuit, frowned at a small tear near the shoulder, and checked her fingernails for damage. "Well, that was therapeutic," she said with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for completing a particularly challenging crossword puzzle. "Nothing like a little light exercise to work out the kinks." She turned to Commander Velash with the same expression she might use when asking for directions to the nearest coffee shop. "Now then, about my manifest approval. I don't suppose you could help expedite that process? I've had a very long day, and I'd really like to get back to my ship before the artificial gravity starts playing up again." Commander Velash had been in station security for 37 standard years. He'd dealt with smugglers, pirates, territorial disputes between species that communicated primarily through pheromone-based insults, and that one memorable incident involving a Phyroxian diplomat and a cargo hold full of what turned out to be extremely illegal entertainment devices. He'd thought he'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer in terms of creative violence and questionable life choices. He had been wrong. Standing in the middle of what looked like the aftermath of a small war, watching a human female calmly discuss paperwork while 3 of the galaxy's most feared enforcers lay groaning around her like discarded toys, Velash felt his worldview undergoing the kind of rapid reconstruction usually reserved for philosophical emergencies. "Ma'am," he said carefully, his translator working overtime to keep his voice steady, "I'm going to need to see some identification." Sarah reached into her jumpsuit pocket with the same casual movement she might use to retrieve a sandwich, causing half of Velash's security team to tense up and finger their weapons. She produced a standard Galactic ID card and handed it over with the kind of polite cooperation that somehow made the entire situation even more surreal. "Sarah Chen, Chen Freight Solutions," she said helpfully. "Fully licensed pilot, clean record, current on all vaccinations and psychological evaluations, well, mostly current." Velash scanned the ID with his wrist reader, and what he saw there made his 4 hearts skip several beats in sequence. The standard information was all there: name, species, occupation, medical history. But buried in the service records section, in the kind of small print that most beings never bothered to read, was a single line that explained everything and made everything infinitely worse. "Colonial Marines," he whispered, the words coming out like a prayer to whichever gods might be listening. "4th Assault Battalion, decorated veteran, honorably discharged." The Cathari merchant who had been recording everything dropped his communicator. The sound it made hitting the floor was unnaturally loud in the sudden silence that had fallen over the trading post. Velash had heard the stories, of course. Every species in the galaxy had heard the stories. When humans first joined the galactic community, there had been 3 separate species that had decided these soft pink creatures would make excellent additions to their empires. Not as equals, naturally, but as livestock, slaves, or entertainment. The hegemony of Vashkar had been the first to make that mistake. Their war fleets had descended on human colony worlds expecting easy conquests and profitable slave raids. 6 months later, the hegemony's capital world was a smoldering ruin. Their military leadership was decorating various human trophy rooms, and the survivors were still trying to figure out how beings with no natural weapons or armor had somehow turned their own superior technology against them. The Zelkoth Empire had learned nothing from the Vashkar example. Their invasion had lasted 3 months before human diplomats arrived at their homeworld, with what they politely termed surrender negotiations. The fact that these diplomats had arrived in ships bristling with weapons that violated 17 different galactic conventions on civilized warfare had made the negotiations surprisingly brief. The Krillian Syndicate had thought they were smarter. Instead of direct invasion, they'd tried economic warfare, piracy, targeted assassinations. The human response had been to dispatch something called Colonial Marines, specialized military units that apparently existed for the sole purpose of teaching hostile aliens why attacking human civilians was a spectacularly bad idea. The Krillian Syndicate no longer existed as a political entity. The few surviving members had been relocated to a pleasant agricultural world where they spent their time growing vegetables and attending mandatory therapy sessions about the value of peaceful coexistence. All of this flashed through Velash's mind as he stared at the small human female who was currently examining the torn spot on her jumpsuit, with the kind of professional concern usually reserved for critical equipment malfunctions. "Colonial Marines don't retire," Sarah said conversationally, apparently reading his expression with uncomfortable accuracy. "We just change our job descriptions, and honestly, freight hauling seemed like a nice, peaceful career choice. Lots of quiet time in hyperspace, minimal interpersonal conflict, regular hours." She gestured around the trading post, where medical teams were now carefully loading the 3 Vorthaks onto stretchers with the kind of cautious reverence usually reserved for handling unstable explosives. "Of course, there's always someone who wants to mess with the peaceful part." Velash made a decision that would later be studied in military academies across 7 sectors as an example of tactical wisdom under pressure. He activated his comm system and broadcast on all station frequencies. "Attention all station personnel," his voice echoed through every corridor, shop and service tunnel in Nexus Station 7. "Effective immediately. New station policy is in effect. Do not touch the humans. Do not threaten the humans. Do not attempt to intimidate, coerce or otherwise interfere with human commercial activities. Any violation of this policy will result in immediate expulsion from the station and permanent banishment from this system." He paused, looking around at the devastation, at the security footage that was probably already being transmitted across the galaxy, at the small human female who was now using a piece of debris to clean under her fingernails. "Amendment to previous announcement," he continued. "All human paperwork is now classified as Priority 1. Manifest approvals will be processed immediately upon submission. Humans requesting station services will be moved to the front of all queues. Anyone causing delays in human administrative processes will be charged with obstruction of commerce and sentenced to 30 days of form-filling duty." Sarah looked up from her impromptu manicure, her expression brightening considerably. "Really? Just like that?" Velash nodded, already mentally composing the report he would have to file with Sector Command, a report that would probably be classified at the highest levels and studied by xenobiologists for decades to come. "Ma'am," he said with the kind of respect usually reserved for active weapons of mass destruction, "your manifest has been pre-approved, your cargo is cleared for immediate departure, and on behalf of Nexus Station 7, I would like to formally apologize for any inconvenience you may have experienced during your visit." Sarah smiled, and somehow that expression was more terrifying than anything that had happened in the previous 10 minutes. "Why, thank you, Commander. That's very accommodating of you." The Cathari merchant's recording of the Nexus incident went viral across 17 different communication networks within 6 hours. By the end of the Galactic Standard Day, it had been viewed approximately 47 million times, translated into 312 languages, and spawned a whole new genre of xenobiological horror fiction. The Vorthak High Command convened an emergency session after watching the footage exactly once. Their official statement, released 3 hours later, consisted of a single line: "Enforcement operations against human targets are hereby suspended indefinitely, pending further tactical assessment." Unofficially, they spent the rest of the session trying to figure out how to quietly relocate their entire species to a different galaxy. The Zelkarian Trade Federation's response was more practical. Within hours of the recording's release, they had issued updated commerce protocols that included helpful illustrations showing proper respectful distances to maintain when conducting business with humans. The diagrams looked suspiciously like the safety instructions for handling radioactive materials. On the Phyroxian homeworld, military analysts were frantically recalculating their threat assessments of human space. The discovery that what they had classified as a low-priority, minimal-threat civilian population was apparently composed entirely of dormant weapon systems in organic packaging had prompted what their historians would later record as the Great Rethinking. The Galactic Consortium's Council of Species called an emergency session for the first time in over a century. Representatives from 43 different worlds gathered in the ancient chambers of Neutral Station Alpha to discuss what the official minutes would delicately refer to as the human problem. Ambassador Kreltoth of the Hegemony Remnants, one of the few survivors of the original human contact wars, stood before the assembly with the weary expression of someone who had been trying to warn people about a terrible danger for decades, only to be ignored until it was too late. Honored colleagues, he began, his voice carrying across the chamber with the authority of bitter experience. We have spent 50 years pretending that humans are just another species. We have treated them as if they were simply unusually clever mammals who happen to develop faster than light travel. He activated the chamber's holographic display, showing Sarah's casual dismantling of the Vorthak enforcement team in slow motion, freeze-framing on her expression of mild annoyance as she broke Grix's wrist. This recording forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Humans are not just another species, they are a species that has weaponized evolution itself. Every single one of them is a potential military asset, trained from birth in survival techniques that other species reserve for their elite special forces. The consortium's first speaker, an ancient Cathari, whose species had the longest recorded history of peaceful coexistence in the galaxy, leaned forward with the kind of attention usually reserved for imminent natural disasters. "Are you suggesting," the first speaker asked carefully, "that all humans possess these capabilities?" "I am suggesting," Kreltoth replied, "that we have been catastrophically underestimating what retirement means to a species that considers armed conflict a recreational activity." The session concluded with the Galactic Consortium's first unanimous vote in recorded history, the immediate revision of all first contact protocols to include what was euphemistically termed Enhanced Human Interaction Guidelines. The guidelines were 17 pages long and could be summarized as, "Be very, very polite." Meanwhile, completely oblivious to her newfound galactic fame, Sarah was enjoying the most efficient cargo run of her career. At her next stop, orbital station Kepler 7, she was met by a reception committee consisting of the station commander, 3 senior trade officials, and what appeared to be the entire customs department. "Ms. Chen," the station commander practically shouted as she disembarked from her ship. "Welcome to Kepler 7. Your manifest has been pre-approved, your cargo cleared for immediate transfer, and we've taken the liberty of having your ship refueled and serviced at no charge." Sarah blinked at the crowd of officials who were practically throwing approved paperwork at her. Thank you? That's unusually efficient." "We pride ourselves on customer service," the commander said, sweat beading on his Cathari forehead, despite the perfectly regulated station atmosphere. "Is there anything else we can do for you? Anything at all?" Sarah considered this, then smiled the same smile that had terrified Commander Velash. "You know what? I could really use a decent cup of coffee. The machine on my ship is still acting up." Within minutes she was presented with coffee from 7 different vendors, 3 varieties of exotic tea, and a fruit beverage that the Zelkarian delegate assured her was brewed from the finest ingredients in the sector, with absolutely no additives that might cause irritation or displeasure. As Sarah settled down to enjoy her surprisingly excellent coffee while watching the most efficient cargo transfer in commercial history, she couldn't help but think that galactic trade was finally starting to make sense. It was amazing what a little clear communication could accomplish,